So this is Trio Philadelphia, and we are talking about a very interesting subject tonight. And let me ask you, how many people here, donor families, recipients, caregivers, have had somebody ask them, did you get any traits or things from your donor that you didn't expect? Have you got any things like the donor did? Yes? Question? Just a question, not...
I get questions from high school kids about that.
Okay. Anybody ever asked you about that, Bob?
I don't think so, but I don't recall having any traits.
I'm not
Yeah,
asking
that
you
was
that.
in the question.
I'm not asking that.
All right.
You told us about the trait you have. We know that.
I can't put that on film.
He's sitting down now as his children, okay? There, I did, not you. All right, and I got to tell you, we used to have a wine and cheese event to raise money for our local organ procurement organization here. And as soon as we as volunteers were there and got into conversation, somebody in that crowd with their wine and cheese would say, so listen, did you ever find anything different after your transplant that related to your donor? And once that question came up, man, you had the cocktail party for the whole night. I mean, they gathered around and you could just wander with that topic and you had your audience engaged. So we're going to talk about that tonight, and what I'm going to do is lay some background to it. And then we'll ask you some personal questions, and typically the answer is no, I've never had anything happen that relates to that. But we'll explore that in different ways. And so the concept originally came, and I'm curious to know if of the audience here, how many remember when we did this? We had a reading, when this book came out, A Change of Heart, the story of Claire Sylvia. And Bill Novak is the guy who wrote her story, okay? And when this book came out, we agreed we would buy the book and read it and come together and have a discussion about it, and then see if we believed her story. Now, her story is one of the most famous of this concept. And I'm going to use the word cellular memory as the term for the concept. And Claire Sylvia showed up in my earlier reading when Deepak Chopra made mention of her in one of his books that I was reading. And I thought, wow, it's in his book. Must have something, right? And so, following her story, very simply, her story is that she got a heart-lung transplant up in Boston back in about 1987 or 88, something like that. She was the first one up in that area that did a heart-lung transplant. In the post-surgery area while she was still in the hospital, the newspaper people were there because it was a new story, and said to her, so, what can't you wait to do when you get out of here? What's the first thing you want to do? And she's like, I can't wait to have a beer. Later on, when she saw the story in the print, she said, a beer? I don't drink beer. Fine wine maybe, or some champagne maybe, but not beer. And lo and behold, she found herself craving Kentucky Fried Chicken nuggets. Because McNuggets is McDonald's. Huh? Kentucky Fried Chicken nuggets. And peppers. And beer. Which is very strange because she was a classical dancer. She really took care of her body. And she couldn't believe this, but she was having these cravings. And then at the same time, she started having dreams. Well, I guess if you're eating peppers, that's because you have dreams, whatever. She had this dream. And in the dream, this young man is coming toward her, and it's a repeated dream. And with each dream, he comes closer. And in her final dream, she said, she came up with his name, Timothy, and the last name started with an L. Now, I don't know if they blanked out the full last name for the sake of privacy or whether she never got the last name. But anyway, it was Timothy L. whatever. And he comes toward her and he goes to kiss her. And she said, ah, and he said, together forever. And she said, it was like I inhaled him. And he was gone. And it didn't happen again. So the next thing we knew, she went to her dream analyst. And when I read that, I said, yeah, right, she's got a dream analyst. We got a coup on our hands here, right? And, but it was a fascinating story. If you've had a transplant, it was a fascinating story to think about. And it was all over the place. Now, I went to the local bookstore, the Barnes & Noble bookstore, back when we had those kind of stores. And they had a rack that had the whole, rack was filled with just this book. And so, of course, I bought it, and we all read it. And I later on went back when it was over, and I said, by the way, how many copies of that book did you sell? And he said, well, here, let me check. And he went into his inventory, and they sold 5. So there's a lot of these books on one of those dollar discount book piles someplace. But anyway, the story goes on that we came together, and the strangeness of this is why I'm telling you the whole detail. Up in Rochester, New York, one of my friend's wives went to a Kaleidoscope convention. And the speaker at that convention was an author by the name of Bill Novak. He's a well-known author. He's actually done an autobiography of Roosevelt, for example. Okay? So he's well-known. And it turns out he was writing a book about a heart transplant story and said to the audience, if any of you know anybody that's had a heart transplant, I'd love to make contact with them for more background in the story I'm writing. And so when she saw me, she said, hey, Jim, this guy, blah, blah, blah. And she ran into him at the Christmas shop up there or something and had a conversation with him. So she had his contact information and said, I don't know if you'd be interested. I said, sure I would, And so I got in touch with Bill Novak. And I knew the story. And so I said to him, can you put me in touch with her? He said, sure. And so that night, when we came together to talk about what we read, which is the story that I just shared, we were able to get her on the phone and have her share her story one-on-one. And when we got all through, she was off the phone. We asked the audience, we had, I think it was about 15 people, and we asked them, what do you think? She a kook or what? Tom, do you remember?
Yeah.
What, do you remember the audience reaction?
I forgot what the...
Okay. I remember clearly, okay, because I've been telling the story for years. But the audience we had all said, she certainly seemed sincere. She wasn't selling anything. She was just sharing what happened to her. And so that book, if you have any contact with anybody doing research or putting together a movie or anything like that, her life has been made into a movie.
I was going to say, isn't it a movie?
What was the name of the movie? You remember?
What's
No,
the
it's
name?
not on there.
What's the
Oh,
name
Change of
of
Heart.
My guess is the movie's a change
No.
of heart.
I don't think so.
Okay, what's her name?
Huh?
What's her
Claire
name?
Sylvia? You know the star on that movie. Anyway, we've got that movie. In fact, Bill, did you look that up for me? What was the name of the movie? It's one of those movies you can see online now. We had a heck of a time trying to find it for our movie nights, and we finally found it. Another long story, so let me not go there. But anyway, so that's the beginning of it, and that's the most extreme case we have that I can tell you. But I can tell you I've had calls from movie directors down in Australia and other European countries call to say, I'm doing a story about cellular memory, and your name came up, do you know anything about this? And I said, well, Claire Sylvia, oh yeah, we know about her. Everybody knows about Claire. So that's Claire's story. And so that book is famous for that reason, okay?
Heart of a Stranger.
Heart of a Stranger, there you go. Okay, and who's the star in that?
Jane Seymour.
Jane Seymour. And the funny part about that, we were trying to find that movie. We couldn't find that movie to save our lives. And Susan found it, a link to where it was going to be on Hallmark.
I found it to be on the Hallmark channel.
And she gave me the link and said, here, my recorder doesn't work, but you can record it. Well, I didn't have a recorder either. And the day it came,
Well, but people who did have a recorder, they said it's not on.
Right.
I said, but the guide I saw said it's on. I did some more searching, and the guide was for the
South
Netherlands.
No, South-
Was it South
South
Africa?
Africa.
Okay, I got another movie from the Netherlands.
yeah. So South Africa.
So I said to Jim, it was on TV, in South Africa. Jim goes, I know somebody.
No, I said, well, we missed that. She says, you must know somebody in South Africa. I said, yeah, right. And once my mind accepted the fact that maybe I did, it turns out I did. Somebody wrote and asked for a copy of my book from South Africa. And I had sent it to them, and a year later it came back. He never picked it up from the post office. So I reached out to him, and it turns out his place got robbed. And they took his video recorder, whatever, and so that's why he never picked it up. I said, could you record this for us? He said, I don't have the recorder anymore. So I knew somebody in South Africa could do it. Well, the net result is Susan's cousin or something
Okay, so
in the
then
Netherlands.
My
Relative.
my nephew's wife's sister
Oh, boy.
lives in the Netherlands, lives in Holland. And for a while I had been checking, Googling the movie to find where and when it would show up on Hallmark. And it showed up again in the Netherlands.
And
I said, Bonnie,
we showed it
can you
here
ask your sister?
with English subtitles. So we finally got to see it. And then most recently I was talking to Bill about this, and he just looked it up and it's now available online someplace. So it's there if you want to see it. But anyway, that's her story. And like I said, she passed away a couple years ago.
What's the name of the book, please?
A Change of Heart. Right. She passed away a couple years ago, and she's the only one I knew that had a copy of the movie itself. And she was living down in Florida, and we never were able to get a copy of it. So anyway, that's the beginning of it. Then along comes Paul Pearsall, Dr. Paul Pearsall. He says Dr. Paul Pearsall. It's a PhD, okay? So he's not a medical doctor, although he has all sorts of fabulous claims about how renowned he is and awards that he has, of which there are several other reports that show that he's not all those things. But he certainly was self-promoting. So you got this interesting book called The Heart's Code, Tapping the Wisdom and Power of Our Heart's Energy. And I'm going to tell you that it is about cellular memory. It's a bunch of malarkey, except for his reference to, he did 75 interviews of heart patients who had stories that we can't explain how they happened, unless you believe something like cellular memory. Those are valid. They've been recorded, and researchers have used those. So forget his whole theory here. Cellular memory is based on the stories of these people who have several stories. Now, I shared those with you by links. Did anybody get a chance to go out and look at them?
Yes.
All right, so you know some of the stories, but I didn't expect that you all would. That I said it was optional. And so I have printouts here, and I was just reading through them the other day because the more I tell those stories, the more the stories become more interesting and not necessarily related to what was actually recorded. But anyway, in that link that I sent you, okay, on his website, he relates some of those stories. And they're kind of far-fetched, but they're validated in the ones he's given you. You've got the family themselves of the donor, you've got the recipient, and you've got the recipient's family, all commenting on it. So it's not just one wacko under new drugs telling stories. And I would recommend that to you, and I'm going to tell you just one or two. I was going to put together slides of each one of the stories, and I thought I'd overkill. And so, for example, guy and his wife are driving down a rainy highway and are having an argument. Violent argument. Goes off the road, he ends up being killed and becomes an organ donor. Okay? The recipient of the heart from that donation has some problems after the transplant, and he can hear this click. He's got this click in his head, and he can't figure out what that's about. And somehow he gets together with the wife of the recipient, and when she hears that, she's, oh my God. She says, that's the windshield wipers that we're going, as we're going down the highway, click, 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 click. And he said, he wants you to know that it's okay. He's not angry. And she's, oh my God, we were in this terrible argument. I felt so guilty since that he died while we were in the middle of this argument. Right? Not too bad. How about the little girl who gets a heart transplant, and it turns out the donor was the victim of a murder. And they had not caught the person who perpetrated the murder. She describes to the police artist what the murderer looks like. They capture him based on her description of the murderer. Okay?
I don't buy that.
Okay, it's just her story. Okay, and the police validated that's what happened. Maybe it's coincidence, whatever, but she described to the police artist, and that's how they found him. The stories go on like that. And so I'm going to pause there and say, have any of you either had a personal experience or heard of somebody in your environment that's had something like that that's happened? It's not as extreme as a murder or, you know, an accident on the road, but where they have something that they trace back to what they think their donor had. Bob, you look like you're itching to share.
Two things. One, the first woman you talked about, the dancer.
Claire Sylvia.
Yeah. A couple of months, not even, within a couple of months after my transplant, one of my wife's friends, a good friend of hers who's a documentarian, he heard that I had had a transplant and he knew about her. I didn't know who she was at the time, and wanted to do a documentary about cellular memory, whatever. And he enlisted my help to help them with that. And I said, I don't have anything to tell you. I said, yeah, my attitude about things has changed for sure. But I said, in my mind, that has everything to do with the trauma of going through having a heart transplant. I said, and so I don't eat the things that I eat differently, or because the nutritionists and the nurses and the doctors are telling me to do that. My behavior is no different than it was before.
So you haven't had any such experience?
So I did not have any experience, but we heard about that. One other thing, and I wish I could remember the guy's name. I remember early on when I was going through biopsies every couple of weeks or so, there was one guy who was in for a biopsy as well. This was after a few years, so it was a little down the road for him, and there were a few other people. And you get to, you sit with people who are waiting for biopsies or whatever, and you chat a little bit, and this guy swore, and I don't remember the specifics, but he definitely felt as though he had experiences that came from the donor.
All right. Anybody else had any personal experiences or have heard from somebody who claims to have it? You've been around a long time, you must have heard some stories.
Well, Jim Doctor, he had a heart transplant.
Right, okay. Now South Jersey.
He doesn't know whether his donor was male or female. Although his family says it definitely was female. He started growing his hair longer after he got it. And when it got longer, he sat there to his daughter would note. He stood there like a woman does, and so he ended up cutting his hair off because of that. But he says, he used to sit there. His family like sit there going, what are you doing? What are you talking about? But he'd take like a girl does and then twirl his hair around his finger. He also said he got nicer, that's why they said he got but yeah, he had a couple of I know a number of people that had taste changes.
Okay.
Which is the other.
I've had one of the local donor families come up to us at a section dance picnic, all excited because she had a letter from her recipient. And the recipient said, I can't get enough bread. And she was so thrilled because her son loved bread, could never get enough bread. And look, Jim, look, And I said, wow, how about that? So, but medical people will tell you that, one, there's no scientific basis for any of this. And secondly, the meds you're on change things, especially relative to tastes, okay? But unless you have contact with your donor family, you got nothing to work with. And so let me finish Claire Sylvia's story. And so she then, her dream analyst said, listen, in order to resolve this problem, you've got to go and find who your donor is. She says, well, it's an anonymous process. I don't know how to do that. He says, well, you're going to still have dreams then. And so she goes to her transplant coordinator that helped her during the transplant and said, you know, can you tell me anything about the donor? He said, no, I can't. You know, well, the night before, you went up to Maine, though. I can't talk about that. Ooh, there's a clue. And so she goes and does some research, goes looking for obituaries up in Maine. There's not that many newspapers in Maine. And she knows the date. You know, she knows it was a young man who was killed in some type of automobile accident. That's what she knew. Doesn't she find the name, Timothy, last name starts with an L, and she makes contact with the family. Now the family, as you would suspect, is kind of apprehensive, like, you know, but they agree to meet her at a restaurant. And she meets with them and she shares some of these things that we were just talking about before. Well, it turns out he was riding his motorcycle when he was hit by a car, and in his jacket were Kentucky Fried Chicken nuggets. And yes, he did love beer and peppers. Whoa. And so they got comfortable enough with her to invite her up to their house. And while they were there talking with her, they said, you know, would you like to see his room? Well, yeah, okay. And on an interview on TV, when she was relative to the book, she had said that she originally, and I don't know what words to use with this, she thought people that had brunette hair were pretty. And now, since the transplant, blondes are more appealing. And the TV show took that the wrong way, and that was frustrating. You know, they said, oh, you're gay. No, I'm just telling you. And so when she went into his room, there's a picture of his girlfriend. And of course, she's blonde. Whoa. Would you like to go out to the cemetery and see where he's buried? She says, yes. And goes out to where the grave marker is, and on the grave marker, together forever, just like he said when he was coming toward her in the dream. That's the complete story, okay? So you can save yourself $1 for this book now.
No, I just looked it up. It's still $25 from Amazon. Unless you buy a used one, it was $7.99.
Well, my point being that you have to make contact with the donor family to be able to find out what the donor was like. And there's a lot of people, I'd say a lot of people, I've read enough stories of people that have done that and have some type of things that they can't explain otherwise. So how does that work? Well, if you follow the trail, you come across somebody by the name of Candace Pert. She's also a PhD, but she's into medical research, okay? She's the one working for the National Institute of Health, the NIH, and she discovers something called neuropeptides that are part of our cellular structure in different parts of our body. She posits that there is some type of memory in neuropeptides. And so you get into this concept of, is there intelligence outside of our mind? And if you think about that for a second, it's very easy to come to agree, well, yes, there is. And so they've done studies, for example, where they decapitated a monkey. And when they assaulted part of the monkey's body, even without a head, meaning no brain to direct the reaction of the body, the white cells went to protect the assault on the body. And so there's something beyond the intelligence we think of in the mind. And the more you get into that, you will find there's a lot of support to that. There is different types of intelligence within the human body. And so wherever that is, neuropeptides as an example, and she does not say cellular memory is where memories come according to her. That's not her thing. Neuropeptides are her thing, okay? And that is a valid medical fact. And so it turns out where the heaviest accumulation of neuropeptides are is in the heart and the liver. And most of these stories that we shared before, and the other dozens that are there, documented in Paul Pearsall's book, are hearts. And so the concept is, if some of our intelligence is in our cells, and you take an organ filled with cells, and you transplant it to somebody else, where is that intelligence? It's in the cells that you just put over this other body. Therefore, does that other body then have some of those memories? Nobody will say yes, but there's an awful lot of background in terms of other theories of cellular memory that are in Paul Pearsall's book. So get past the kook that he was. He's died now. I did talk to him down in Hawaii, and so I've had conversation with him too, and I would not put any credibility beyond the interviews he did, and so what he extracts from that, that's theory. But Candace Pert, she's a serious researcher, and so the neuropeptide part is true. How that works in terms of those memories, nobody knows. But there's a lot we don't know. And so in the article that I gave you the link to, if you're interested, there's more to read there. And what we'll try to do is when we put this video together for the website, I'll put those links up there so people can find the article we're talking about too. Susan?
I've had two things. One, I really joked about. I don't know. The only thing I know about my donor is that it was a male, and he was late teens, early 20s. But before my transplant, I never wore shoes indoors. Didn't own a pair of slippers. Now I'm a diabetic. I grew up as a diabetic, so I always wore shoes. I don't even wear sandals or flip flops because I always wore shoes. Inside, I never wore shoes. Post transplant, I got like 5, 6 pair of slippers. So I don't think about it anymore. I thought about it, more of the first few years, it's 20 years. But I always used to joke that he was maybe a shoemaker or a shoe salesman, or he had a shoe fetish. I mean, I don't know. But there's something.
Have you ever had any contact with the donor?
No, I know
That's the
nothing other
challenge.
than what I said.
Yeah.
And the only other odd thing, but it's not the same. It's almost like in reverse. I used to often fear getting into a car. It didn't stop me from getting into a car. Or, I got my driver's license as soon as when I was 16, all that kind of thing. But I would often, when I'd be opening the door to get in the car, picture a crash or think about a crash. Ever since my transplant, that thought doesn't go through my mind. I don't think that.
Yeah, okay.
Now, I don't know.
It's because
how
you've
he
been
died.
through the crash and you came
Yeah,
alive.
so I don't know how he passed away. I know the day of the night that he passed away, I do know a little bit more about my donor. The night that he passed away, the Tuesday night, I was at the gym. The instructor of the group class I was in was a doctor of physiology who worked with heart and lung transplant patients. Coincidence, and he knew that I was waiting, and every now and then he'd ask me how I'm doing. And that night, he asked me how I'm doing. He said, I thought about you today, we've got somebody on life support. Now, he'd never said that to me. I'd been in the class for over 2 years. And I said, thanks for thinking, I'm okay. I got home from my gym class that night, and my phone was ringing. Come on in tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. We need to work you up and have dinner. You're second on the list. Presumably that was the person. Now, I've tried to find them through obituaries, but I couldn't. And unfortunately, my gym class instructor passed away shortly after my transplant from cancer. So I couldn't even jokingly needle him for, a little more
And
information.
for the sake of our audience, you got what?
A kidney and a pancreas.
20 years ago. Okay. And so typically this is associated with hearts, but could be with any organ. The stuff that's documented is all relative to heart recipients. And so in answering that question to people, did I ever experience anything? No, I did not. I did play around one time and almost got slapped for it by my wife because I don't drink wine. Anybody that's got good wine, you gotta try this, Jim. I don't like wine. I like grape juice, but not wine. And if you want to share a really good wine with me, listen, don't waste too much. You just put a couple drops in there. I'll taste it. And if it's really good wine, I'll get a chill at my back, like, ugh, that's good wine. And I really wish that I could enjoy wine. I think that's a really cool hobby to have, and I cannot do it. But sometimes
I'd be happy to try and teach you.
And so after the transplant, like a year or so out, my wife and I were out to dinner, and she enjoyed a piece of wine, or a glass of wine. And when she ordered it, I ordered one too. And she looked at me and go, what are you doing? I said, I want to see it from you. maybe I like it. And I did. I was totally surprised because I never found, I've tried many of them, never found any wine that I cared to drink any more than a drop. And so when I went to order a second glass, she said, no, you're not. Now another time, and I don't know, despite being in touch with my donor family, I don't know about Roberto's experience with wines, okay? I don't know his experience with coffee, but I'll tell you, I do not drink coffee. I don't like the taste of it. Even when I worked in a restaurant and made the coffee that people raved about, I could not drink it. It just doesn't do anything for me. Coffee, ice cream, nothing coffee, can't do it. And so one day at work, I'm visiting with a guy in his office. It's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so it's late in the afternoon. He's got a coffee maker behind him. And we're sitting there, and I said, you know, how strong is that coffee? He said, it's been sitting there all day, you know, so it's pretty strong. I said, I'd like to try a cup. He said, yeah, sure. So he gives me a cup of black coffee, and I took a taste of it, and it did not repel me. I thought, And so at a wedding sometime thereafter, you know, we always turned our cups over because we didn't drink coffee. I did turn my cup over. My wife says, you need to turn your cup over. I said, no, I'm going to have some coffee. No, you're not. And so I've tasted coffee once in my life besides not liking it, and it wasn't too bad after the transplant. I haven't taken up coffee, don't want to. Wine, same thing, and never found a wine that didn't give me a chill in my back except that one night, and I never went back for more. And so reaching out to a donor family, as I have, my contact, Gilberto, brother to Roberto, 38-year-old man over in Brooklyn, New York, who was attacked on the street celebrating his 38th birthday, ended up in a coma, eventually declared brain dead 9 days later. His brother, Gilberto, helped make the decision for him, and his heart ended up over in Philadelphia, and it's still beating strong today, 24 years later. And so I don't know enough about him, and yet I have contact with his brother, and I keep thinking, I got to ask him more. You know, has he had any contact with any of the other recipients, for example? He's putting together an album about his brother. He has been doing that for 10 years, and I still haven't seen it. But we have contact once a year when I write a thank you note to him, and I've talked to him on the phone maybe 2 or 3 times over the 24 years. I did meet him at the Transplant Games back in the mid-90s, and we had a very nice time together, and really nice guy. And I've actually visited the grave site of my donor. And Pam took some flowers from our garden and put it there in front of his parents' grave marker where he's buried. And so we had that connection. But I have to say, the research I did, I realized doctors would tell you, you know, it's the medications. And so I said, okay, so somebody who's had 2 heart transplants, for example, what's changed between the 2 because you're still on the same meds? Did anything change?
They're schizophrenic.
And lo and behold, Dick Harbord had 2 heart transplants. He was part of our organization, so I got to talk to him. And I've now found at least 8 or 10 other people that have had 2 heart transplants, and I've asked them that question. And they've all said the same thing. Nope.
Did you ask Amy the other day?
No, I didn't yet. Right? We were talking about an author of another book that we just met out in Chicago this past weekend. And she got 26 years out of her first heart transplant. And then she got a second transplant, and she's had that one for 4 years. So that's a good question. And I have a conversation with her now. She's getting involved with TRIO, by the way.
Yeah.
And so it'd be interesting to see if she has any different answer to that. But anyway, I hope that, are there any questions you might have based on what we've shared or what we've discussed? Again, I haven't found any medical expert who will give any credence to any of this. Let me say that right up front. What I wanted to do was ask up front what your thoughts on this were, and then after we had this sharing, ask you what your thoughts were. So let me go around right now, and Bill's going to capture this on video for us. What do you think? I'm just leaving that as an open-ended question. Vivian, what do you think?
Well, as a donor family, I would, if I had met my donor or my recipient of my son's organs and they told me something that they had a trait of his attitude or food or something, I would be thrilled, because it would make me feel that a part of him is still here and thriving. It would make me feel good. I'd probably want to be a little bit connected to them, how they're doing. Do you still eat it, or do you do, still do whatever Curtis used to do?
Tom, it's been how many years, and you've been very active in terms of audiences and so forth.
It's almost 31 years since Curtis's death. Yeah, we never, unfortunately, never had any contact with any of his boys.
So what do you think of this, given whatever your experience has been, and what we're talking about?
I give it credibility. I mean, there are things that don't. I mean, most of the ones that I know personally are like taste things that change. I know the one, she had a kidney transplant, and she never ate desserts, never liked sweets or anything. After her transplants, all of a sudden, she found herself craving sweets, and she found out that her donor was a 5-year-old girl. A kidney transplant from a 5-year-old. And she did receive a letter of, did have some communication, but of course the 5-year-old would eat sweets,
Yeah.
And there are other people that have had, from a taste standpoint, have had changes.
And that one's clearly, medical people say it's because of the drugs.
Well,
who knows?
You're right. There was I read an article, I couldn't find it. Close to 20 years ago, there was a doctor that was trying to disprove the fact that that there was a transfer. So he went and looked at everything. As I remember, he ended up saying your DNA has tasted. That it's logical that you could have a taste. You got different DNA coming across, you could have taste. A number of people that have had those things that I were able to talk to, and said, this is something that they liked, and now I like it, and previously I don't.
One of the other stories, if you follow through the link to that, was of the guy who received the heart from a policeman who'd been shot in the face. And after he received the transplant, he would have times where it was just like a white flash coming at him, and his face felt like it was burning. And finally, he did find out what happened to his donor, and he was shot at close range in the face. And so, another story without explanation. Sue, what do you think?
I don't believe him,
Okay.
because he's nothing like me. And
Oh, I like cruising.
Well, you like that before the transplant. And Laura, our daughter, gave him a second transplant, and he's nothing like her.
Okay.
I mean, I like cottage cheese, I like yogurt. He won't even try those things. So there's nothing there with the taste stuff.
Okay. Bob, what do you think of the theory?
I believe there's some kind of truth in there.
Okay.
Again, when you talk about your DNA and everything else, now you have somebody else's DNA mixed in, why not?
Okay.
You know?
Paul? What do you think?
I'm conflicted.
Okay.
I know that my personality and my outlook, and particularly my feeling about others, has changed to the positive. And all of those things definitely reflect what I'm learning and currently know about my donor, who was a very positive, friendly, and fun-loving sort of an individual. But I'm not convinced that it's something chemically or physically related to the fact that I'm housing his kidney at this point in time. I think it has more to do with realizing that I've been given a second chance.
Okay. It certainly is a life event that would have repercussions in your whole outlook on life, your emotions, et cetera, so that makes a lot of sense. Steve, how about yourself? What do you think?
The only thing I can put my hands around is that, in my case, I know nothing about my donor other than it was a 39-and-a-half-year-old person from another part of the country. I mean, really sketchy information. And the information I was given was supplied to me by one of the surgeons who was a foreigner, with a very, very heavy accident, and we got maybe into 5 minutes worth of Mike badgering with questions while they're waiting for the plane to come to the East Coast with the kidney. And he said, I'm not going to tell you anymore. You just have to consider yourself the luckiest person in the world tonight. And I heard him.
Right.
And ever since then, the only thing I can sense is different is, as you indicated, my personality's had a tweak because I feel, an element of thanks, and I'm impacted by, getting a second shot at life. A few of the items that I used to eat with relish and vigor, I can't eat any longer. I don't know if that's attributed to transfer. My whole approach to food has changed, and restaurants. Beyond that, personality, anytime I get in trouble at home, I tell my wife it's because...
Well, step back from your personal experience. What do you think of the concept?
I can't challenge it. My mind begs to hear more, wants to see more research. At this point, I don't know if this is a bunch of malarkey, but I don't close my mind to it. I'd love to hear something to confirm yes or no.
One of the stories that is in that thing we linked to was a guy who received the heart from a black teenager who he assumes was a rap star or something, or rap person, right? And it turns out the kid was a violinist and was killed with his violin somehow, I forget exactly how. And after the transplant, without knowing any of that, his wife said, all of a sudden he's listening to classical music. Where did that come from? And he didn't know either. And later on he found out that this black teenager was into classical music. She says he goes around listening to classical music, humming it. She says, this is crazy. So these stories are strange stories. Susan, what do you think of the concept?
Yeah, I'm skeptical. I mean, I joke about the shoes,
Yeah.
but I'm skeptical. I would like to hear more. I mean, I hear stories, but I don't know them. I don't know any of the parties involved. So, if I could meet my donor's family, I would certainly ask them about the shoes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not saying it couldn't be.
You're
I just don't know
a healthy skeptic.
Yeah.
Bob, what do you think of the concept? Not your personal experience, you shared that.
I think it's plausible. I can't ascribe any of the changes that I've gone through
Right.
to be attributable to that. I think it's more, as you guys discussed, it's having gone through all that trauma. And yeah, am I different? Yeah, very different. Was I philanthropic before? Yeah, well, but mostly with checks and things like that. And, a little bit of involvement. Now I'm involved, as you know, like you, in all kinds of crazy things.
And let me say it again. Without talking about your personal experience, what do you think of the theory?
I think it's plausible.
Okay.
I think it's plausible. I haven't felt it yet, but I think it's plausible.
Who knows, 2 years ago, one of the things that I talked to the study, they said only 6% of the people that they actually interviewed had really any kind of thing. So we're not talking about something that's
Right.
everybody's going to relate to everybody. They got 75 stories that seem to be real.
Bill, how about yourself? What are you thinking about the theory? In fact, leave the camera facing this way. Come on over here and stand between Susan and Bob and answer that question.
Okay.
So just leave that on. Come on over so we get you in here. Our camera is built all the way. Take care of the camera. Bill, have you had any experiences at all like any of this? Yes or no?
Well, me personally, no, but certainly I've had interaction with people, as Bob did, with biopsies, sharing stories. It's something that I think is certainly plausible.
Okay.
And it's interesting, I was just Googling on the internet, and you can read several different stories. In fact, I came across a site, here's 10 stories, and they're very interesting.
Yeah. And that's probably related to the 10 stories that were recorded here. When you see 10 stories, it takes you right back to Paul Pearsall's book, okay? And so the thing there is, he recorded the interviews, they've been transcribed, and some researchers took that material, and that's what you see in a lot of these things. So that part is somebody saying what they think, and it's collaborated by family and or the donor side of things. And it's just giving you some more background. Personally, I'm fascinated with it. I often use the word research, and I don't mean to imply that I'm a researcher, I'm not. But certainly as a heart recipient out of 24 years, I'm curious. And I've read enough of this stuff because I review books, and when I read about it, I read it with the perspective of all that I found out. And in my own book, I capture in PDF form a number of these documents as a place. So I can always go back and find them. And these books, for example, are all over in the Family House Transplant Library over there. They're all books I've reviewed. And in the back of Paul Pearsall's book are the very documents that were printed out and put in the back of that book back when I reviewed it. And when I went to my file on my computer to find materials for today, there they were. I printed them out, not realizing that when I went to pick up the books for this, they would be there too. And so I shared my experience, which is not my personal experience, it's wine and coffee, you know what that's about, with the donor family and the young man who loved bread and was the donor, and the recipient loves bread, can't get enough bread. So what do I believe? I believe we don't know a lot about this world, about how our bodies work and how these things work. And so I was fascinated going back and rereading just today. When I went to pick the books up over at the Family House, I sat there reading, and there's at least 15 different theories of how this might work, one of which is cellular memory, with the concept behind cellular memory, 15 theories of how that might work. None of it is scientifically supported, okay? And so bringing out Candace Pert, I don't mean to say that she has research that proves cellular memory. That's not what I did. And so I'm not saying that's valid or not. I'm just saying they're fascinating stories for those of us who've had transplants. And if you haven't had somebody ask you about it, well, you haven't talked to enough people yet, okay? And so I'm going to close this, unless somebody else wants to add a comment, with mentioning these articles, because what I'm going to do is on the video, I'm going to put the link. So the first one is about organ transplants and cellular memories from a Nexus article, and it's from Paul Pearsall's website. And so I'll put the link on top of this part of the video. The second one that we put out for this meeting was titled Cellular Memory in Organ Transplant by Leslie Takanuchi. And so that link will also be right here on the video. I had this when I edited it, so the video link is right here. Everybody see it? And then the third one is entitled Cellular Memory Fails the Memory Test. And this is somebody who really does quite a job debunking Paul Pearsall and all his claims. It almost sounds, no, I'm not going to say it sounds like Trump, it doesn't. But I mean, his self-promoting claims are disproven by this researcher who went out and said, he never went to that school. There is no such award, or he's the only one who ever got that award, so it's probably self-given. And so there's a link for cellular memory fails the memory test. And so I would highly recommend that those who are watching this video do that research. And for those of you here, if we've tweaked your interest to go back to those, I have to admit that every time I go back, I learn something more from the same readings. And so he did 72 interviews. About 10 are really described in detail here. And then they're interwoven in some of the other chapters to support things. And so it's fascinating reading. So with that, thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for sharing the success of your own transplants and your donation, etc. And when I get the YouTube video up there, I'll send you out the link so you can visit again. And thank you for sharing. Thanks. Bill, thank you for your support behind the camera. And we're off.